Welcome to the SaaS Revolution Show, a podcast by SaaStock. Here we interview SaaS founders from around the world who've been there and done that, as they share the ins and outs of how they built their businesses, their operations, their path to securing investment, and more. Our mission with the podcast is to help you, the founder, learn how to scale your SaaS, maintain your well-being, and navigate the complexities of this ever-changing industry. I'm your host, Alex Theuma, and together we'll explore the good, the bad, and the ugly in the journey to SaaS success. Welcome back to the SaaS Revolution Show. I am your host, Alex Theuma, CEO and founder of SaaStock. Delighted to be joined today by somebody I've known for quite a long time, and that is Dee Coakley, who is the co-founder and CEO of Boundless. Welcome, Dee. How are you doing?
Thank you, Alex, and thanks so much for having me. We have known each other for quite some time. I think we first met just before you launched the first SaaStock.
I think so. So I think originally it was probably through...
I've been listening to the podcast for a long time. Great to be here.
Well, that's good. Obviously, the podcast has been going for 9 years, so longer than SaaStock, and the 10th anniversary will be probably like next March. So it's pretty good.
I didn't actually think it was that long, but we've known it.
There we go, 10 years. Yeah, exactly. Well, but this is the first time on the podcast, Dee. So we've probably had a number of podcast-worthy conversations that haven't been recorded. But now we're going to record one, and I'm delighted to be able to do this and actually share your story, because obviously when we first met, let's say, as it was 10 years ago, and I didn't think like you, it was that long. You weren't at Boundless. I think you've been the CEO at a few different companies, but actually this is probably leading into who you are and that kind of first question. So I don't want to give away all that information, or I'd love to know, and the audience as well, who is Dee Coakley?
Yeah, so I have been working in the tech startup space for 15 years now, which is a bloody long time. I started my career in the music industry, working with record companies and in artist management. So quite different, but I always say in both cases, you're building fan bases.
Yeah.
There's that comparison. And 15 years ago, started with a tech startup. I was based in London at the time. I was with a company called Masabi there. I was about to say your UK listeners, probably your listeners in many parts of the US and right across Europe are users of Masabi's technology, but maybe don't realize it's ticketing for the mass transit sector. They tend to white label their product and sit at the back end. And I was in COO roles there, subsequently at a Dublin-based company called Bazimply, workforce management software business. Then I moved to Actionista, which is an interactive video tech, all B2B SaaS. And that was what led to me founding Boundless in 2019. So long time startup C-level person, but first time founder with Boundless.
And a couple of things there. So actually, I think maybe you had told me, but forgive me, I think I didn't know until more recently when you mentioned that you were in the music industry before and artist management, and I can't remember the names, but there was a couple of artists that stood out to me, or maybe it was one, but name me the most sort of interesting sort of band or that you were involved in, somewhere.
I worked with a lady called Beyonce that you might have heard of. That's probably what you're thinking of. I worked with Morrissey, Iron Maiden, Wu-Tang Clan.
Wow.
Quite a lot of interesting artists.
Very cool. Yeah, I think maybe it was, actually I didn't know the Beyonce one, but even cooler, I think it was Iron Maiden that you had said, and I was pretty impressed, but impressive list nonetheless. As we get into the founding story of Boundless, and so you mentioned this was 2019 when you founded the company, and I was also reflecting before this podcast, because I remember meeting you for lunch and in Farringdon or in Clerkenwell, where you were telling me about this idea, and we were kind of like chatting it over, and you were saying this is something that you wanted to do, and then obviously a couple of years later I found out that you'd gone ahead and done it. Had I been able to turn back time, and it's a magic thing that I don't have the ability to do. And if I was being able to invest at the time, I would love to have got in. But let's go back to 2019 then, and this kind of like founding story and why you created Boundless and what it is.
Yeah, so I mentioned I was a COO at the 3 B2B SaaS companies I was with. So I always oversaw the finance, legal and HR functions. And it was at the last business I was with that we very organically ended up with an internationally distributed team. We weren't going seeking talent in other territories. We had members of our team request moves overseas, and very organically we had opportunities to hire really great people in various territories. And I found myself as the person responsible for finance, so payroll. I was looking after legal, so all of that compliance stuff, and HR. I found myself tearing my hair out trying to figure out, how the hell do we make this work? How do I pay these people? How do I get aligned with the local tax regime in that country? What kind of employment agreement should I have them on? Do I have to give these people different benefits to workers in other territories? And I just couldn't find easy answers to these things. And I used a number of service providers. There weren't any tech solutions in this space. It's really hard to believe now. This was 2018. There weren't any tech solutions in this space. There were service providers. I used a few of them and the experience was really, really poor. And I thought, wow, there have to be some quick wins here. If you just apply a SaaS front-end product and take people on a journey through a SaaS product, immediately their experience is going to be better. But I knew it was a really gnarly problem. And I knew that there were all of these requirements around services at the back end. And I knew that what was there and what existed was really poor quality. So I would say I was a reluctant founder of this business. I was at a stage personally where I really was ready to take a jump and become a founder. But this seemed like a super gnarly place to start. But it's that cliche, it's the problem that wouldn't go away. It just kept coming back around. And it was actually SaaStock in 2018. It was literally like there were these red flashing lights all over the place saying I had to do this. I had a number of conversations with people that I met there that where they were talking about having this problem. I remember one talk, a panel where people were talking about this, because this was before COVID. Yeah. So remote work was still quite new. And people were talking about the locationless company of the future. And I just thought that this is the time to do something in this space. I need to make a go of it. So that was the end of 2018. And then I decided to devote my time to it from January 2019.
I kind of laughed there when you said that literally red lights flashing everywhere at SaaStock 2018, because I think there was. So I just remember it was either 2017 or 2018 when we actually got some complaints from the audience saying the red lights behind the stage were hurting their eyes, and we didn't do that. Again, it looked good. It looked good. I thought it did. And actually, then just a question there. So, as you said, back then, 2018, when you kind of had this idea, this what perhaps I would call like employer of record, type category. Certainly, it felt like it didn't exist, right? And now, if you look at it today, obviously, the last couple of years, it's exploded, right? And it's been a very hot sector, and especially like during COVID. But given at the time, 2018, 2019, when you're about to become a founder for the first time, start a SaaS business for the first time, and actually start, a SaaS business in maybe a category that doesn't exist, like, was that quite scary for you? Thinking like, well, I'm building something, but there isn't any competition, there isn't a market for it. Like, how was that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there wasn't the terminology to describe it. Yeah. So I had been a customer of a couple of businesses that I would now describe as employers of record, but at the time they didn't even use that label themselves. Yeah. They were services business. They weren't SaaS tech businesses. And at the time when you Googled about this stuff, no one had language to describe it. So people were starting to use the terminology PEO, professional employer organization, was used in the US. It's a slightly different model. the customer stays the direct employer, but they handle all of the services and admin relation to employing the people. And then people were starting to talk about employer of record. The merchant of record was something that existed. So I certainly started using the language employer of record. It seemed to make sense. But people use those terms back then. People use those terms PEO and EOR interchangeably. And everyone was very confused about what that meant. And when I would describe what I was setting out to do to people, when I would describe it to VCs, who were obviously really clever, knowledgeable people who talk to a lot of founders, it was really hard to get people beyond payroll. They would say you're a payroll business. And it was difficult to explain that this was a different category. So, yeah, it was difficult. It was also really daunting, really, really daunting. But I could point, there's that classic thing when you're raising in the very early stages. If you say you have no competition, that makes investors really, really nervous. We could point to services businesses that were doing what we did or aspects of what we did. So that helps if you're in category creation. But people did, even now outside of tech, a lot of people don't know what employer of record is. And there is still a lot of education to be done. So it's still a new emerging space. Yeah,
still early days for sure. And exciting to see, a lot of companies and like Boundless, growing really well, within that space, right? And then so we're in the midst of 2024, just, I guess kind of, just crossed kind of halfway. So you've been going, let's say 5 years or so, which is great. Any data you can share about the company, just to kind of help the audience give a picture or get a picture in terms of where you're at since 2019 to now?
Yeah, sure. So we started serving customers in July 2020. We don't need to go into the details of how our business operates, but we have a requirement to have a lot of infrastructure at the back end. We own all of our own infrastructure. So we have a network of 30 in-country entities worldwide. We have bank accounts worldwide. So we're the direct employer of record for our customers. So there was a period of setting up that infrastructure. So started serving customers in July 2020. We hit 1 million ARR right at the start of 2022. So about 18 months in, we hit that number. So really happy to talk you through that journey. Mm-hmm. And then we hit 5 million ARR. We've seen quite significant growth. So by mid-2022, we were growing 200% year on year. By mid-23, growing over 250% year on year. So we hit 5 million ARR around Q3 2023. So it's never as fast as you want it to be, but pretty fast pace of growth.
Yeah. So thanks for sharing this. And how many employees does Boundless have? Are you a remote organization? Are you centralized? And also, have you taken any investment, or are you bootstrapped?
Yeah, so we're not cookie cutter. We're not a classic SaaS business when it comes to these kinds of metrics. We did raise early on. So we've raised a total of about 5 million euro to date, but we haven't raised in quite some time. So we did a pre-seed round and a seed round. We did the seed round in early 2021. We haven't had a new institutional investor come in since then. So we're a bit closer to something that's bootstrapped. I think a lot of founders that are bootstrapped would laugh when I say that, given that we raised 5 million early on, bearing in mind we had to build out all of that infrastructure. So we had costs beyond building tech product. We are 32 people today. For quite a long time, through a lot of that growth, we were a much smaller team. We were 12 people for quite a long time. And I can talk you through the ebb and flow of that. And we're profitable. So we hit profitability in Q2 2023. And we can talk a little bit about what led us to that point.
Definitely. Well, I think it's a good segue. Let's talk first of all, getting to that 1 million ARR. So I think you said it took it was about 18 months, something like that, which is pretty good going, right? Given I've seen a lot of SaaS companies, and you do get a few that get there like, super quick. And even I've seen, and obviously you take him for his word, like on LinkedIn, Adam Robinson has started a new SaaS business that's got to, I think, a couple of million revenue in like 12 weeks or something like that. But it's pretty exceptional, right? And it's not the rule. And most, take a long time to get to that 1 million. And even I think UiPath, which was probably the first European decacorn, I think they took something like 10 years to get to 1 million. And then they took a few years to get to, that 10 billion valuation, or I don't know what the revenue run rate was. But let's look at that. So it took 18 months to get to 1 million. Can you tell us a little bit about the size, the structure of the team, maybe how you were doing sales, how you got to that 1 million, key learnings there?
Yeah, sure. So we were a very small team then. That was when we were about 12 people, and we stayed around that number of people for quite a while. We invested, probably the best decision we made when it came to go to market, and I would say it's one of the few good decisions early on around go to market, was we invested in content right from day one. And as you know, we hired Irina, who was previously head of content and comms at SaaStock. So she had a wealth of experience. She had multiple roles writing for tech audiences. At this stage, this was before COVID. So we thought our customer base was going to be remote companies, companies that were very heavily remote, which at that stage was still it was clear there was a trend moving in the direction of remote, but it was still a pretty new thing. I think you did ask if we're remote. We've always been remote first. So my co-founder is in France. So we've been remote from day one. We invested in content and knew that what we were doing, we're a compliance product. And for us, from super early on, we were really focused on full compliance and being really high quality. And that meant if that was our positioning, we had to establish our position as a trusted thought leader in this space. And we knew that the path to doing that was through content. So we focused on that in a really deep way. And it was always high quality, very long form content. If you look at some of our content, it's not for everyone. Global payroll leaders will love our really deep articles on the tax regimes of various different jurisdictions. HR leaders will love our focus on handling benefits alignment for global teams. Pretty gnarly topics, and we go into them in a very, very deep way. It's not mass market stuff. And that's always worked really well for us. So that was the first focus. One thing I would say that I would do differently and would advise any founder to do differently, we didn't have a C-level go-to-market person on the founding team. And, I'm sure I will found other companies in the future. I will make sure I have a go-to-market leader right from day one, someone that's done it multiple times. So there was, like most founders, I guess, there was a lot of making it up as we went along and figuring it out. So the content was really the cornerstone and continues to be a real pillar of our go-to-market strategy. On the sales side, it was like every business, founder-led sales early on. We didn't have a founder that had ever done sales before, but we understood the problems inherently, and we had a network. And we just spoke to everyone we knew who had a remote team, and everyone we spoke to, we said, who else can you introduce us to? And in the early stages, we didn't say to people, can I demo my product to you? Can we get on a sales call? Everyone we reached out to, we said that we were building something, and we'd love their input and we'd love their advice. And we treated all of those calls as discovery calls, not just sales discovery calls, but product discovery calls. And it was asking people to articulate their problem to us, and then we would outline what we were building. But we really weren't selling. It wasn't a hard, we weren't doing a hard sell type sales pitch.
Education,
in the early days. Yeah, education. Yeah, and again, it was that period of time when people didn't know what EOR was. So we had to explain the legal structure of how it worked. But we learned so much from those calls, and so much to this day of our messaging and positioning comes from what we heard back then. We had a CRM, we always had a CRM right from day one, but we didn't do automated outreach, which the world's changed a bit. Automated outreach doesn't work now in the way that it did back then. But if I was going back and doing it again, I would have stepped up on that front much earlier on.
Yep. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, look, a couple of things are interesting. Obviously, you mentioned if you started a new business, you'd have a go-to-market, co-founder on there, and I expect that's very valid. Obviously, what I've seen from most SaaS founders that I've interviewed, perhaps they're coming, they've been a COO before, or they're technical, and they haven't sold before, but they have to do it, right? And I think I don't know. I kind of wonder if there is a way. Yes, it's helpful if you've got those kind of commercial skills, but like you said, I think the CEO, should be the one that's kind of leading the sales, whether you've got the sales skills or not. Sometimes it actually may be helpful because, as you say, you're not going in there with a hard sell and maybe trying to, close and use certain tactics. You're going in there to not only educate your customer, but also get a lot of feedback for the product, right? And so it's part sale, part discovery call, and that can be really beneficial for the company. And whilst SaaStock is not SaaS business, and like I say, it was helpful for me that I had 11 years in sales coming into it, and naively thinking, now I've got my own company, I don't have to sell anymore, only for a brief moment, and then realized the first thing I had to do was go out and sell, right? But that definitely did help. But it's interesting to obviously get that perspective. And on the content side of things as well, say going for the long form, quality over quantity. I think John Collins, if he was listening to this, would be smiling, because I know that's something that he preaches. He's been on the podcast before, used to, for listeners, that is, he used to run content for Intercom and Ramp. And it's kind of good to see that as well. So thanks for sharing that. And then you mentioned so you went from 1 million to then 5 million, which was by the end of 2023. So 2 years, pretty much. And but also, if we remind ourselves, we go back to those years, those periods, right? This was, difficult times. Actually, even like, as you got to 1 million, so we're talking about, we've got the COVID years, like 2020, 2021, not easy for any business, right? And then 2022, we're kind of out of it temporarily, but then there's a war that starts in Russia and Ukraine. And then the SaaS market in, what was it, like April or May, SVB collapsing, and pretty much the SaaS market, went to pot for a little bit, shall we say, whether that's an understatement. But certainly I think we've been in my lifetime of being in SaaS, it felt like the first SaaS recession, but you still grew the business to 5 million in revenue. So really kind of love to learn how you did that. What was your experiences? How did you navigate everything that was going on from, COVID to whether the macro environment of wars and, and then the economy, and the impact on SaaS, and how you got through that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, it was definitely, like, for everyone, I think it was a really turbulent period of time for everyone in our own lives, and the world at large did feel like it was on fire. So we started selling to customers around February, March 2020. And we also kicked off a fundraise in March 2020.
Yes.
Now that sounds bananas now, right? When you look at that timing. But at the time, you've set a plan that this is what you're going to do. And when COVID came along, we all thought it would be a much shorter thing. We all thought we'd go home for a few weeks and then things would pass over.
Yeah.
But when we were fundraising, like we were talking to investors, we were on Zoom calls. First up, people weren't really used to doing these kinds of meetings on Zoom. In my first 10 years of working in the tech space, and I led fundraising at the previous businesses I was with, I did all my VC meetings face to face. You didn't do them on Zoom. You know, I would fly to London and go and meet people and sit in a meeting room with them. So we were trying to raise, and we were doing calls with investors, and people were just glazed over. You know, people were in survival mode. Yeah. The data now shows people were not signing deals in those first couple of months, first few weeks. So that was tough. So we just had to ride that out. And in terms of selling to customers as well, you know, we'll never know, would we have wrapped faster if that wasn't the situation? Who knows? People weren't focused on compliance. They were focused on getting laptops out to people. But somehow we did manage to get those early customers, and it was small numbers. So fast forward a little bit. So we got through those early days of COVID. We hired our first account exec about a year into things. So we were at about 335k ARR. So we were looking towards $1 million ARR, but we didn't have anything repeatable at that stage. It was very, very early days. Of course, you think you'll bring in someone who's really experienced at selling, and that, as you mentioned, as a founder, you'll step away from selling, and that person will sell without you, and you'll never be involved in sales again. It just doesn't really work that way. But with hindsight, looking at our early sales hires and more recent sales hires, and when you look at the data, the early sales hires just ramp much more quickly. Because as founders, you spend so much time with them. And when it's a smaller business, they just have a lot more access to you. They're sitting in at meetings with you. You're coaching them directly. And that means people can ramp at a faster speed. So we had our first account exec come in May 2021, and he did ramp really quickly, and it did really well. In his first year, I think, if I remember correctly, I think maybe he did about 850k ARR in his first year. So that was really, really great. We probably didn't realize, but we were pipeline building through that time. All of these meetings we were having with people, that was pipeline, that was warmed up. So having people coming into warmed up pipeline is really, really helpful. When we hit $1 million ARR, which was at the end of 2021, we brought in our second account exec. And again, he was experienced. He had actually been selling what we do, but in a services business. So it wasn't a tech business, but he understood the problems that we solve. And again, he ramped really quickly, and that worked really well. In terms of how we focused on demand gen at that point in time, I would say it was only around then that we started to get a lot more sophisticated about how, until then, it was just like trying to make stuff up as we went along. We understood content and knew how to do content. I'm not sure we knew how to produce high quality content. I'm not sure we really knew how to disseminate that high quality content. And we started working with vendors probably when we were at about $1 million in ARR. We started working with a lot of external vendors. I think we've done that really well. Arena, who's our head of marketing now, she was our head of content originally, but she progressed to being head of marketing. She does a really good job at selecting and managing vendors, and she can manage quite a sizable pool of vendors at the same time. And when I talk about vendors, I'm talking about strategists, really. At that time, for quite a long time, we had a 1-person marketing team. It's now a 4-person team. At that time, we would have used people externally to help us to define our ICP, so our ideal customer profile. So figuring out who we were going to go after and how we target them. We also used an external agency to work with us on messaging and to figure out our priorities. We were really lean. We hadn't raised a lot of cash. We had this tiny team. We couldn't do all of the things that we would like to do.
Yeah.
So having someone external help you to surface to the top what's going to have the biggest impact with the lowest expense and most quickly was really helpful. And we did start working on PR around that time. We worked with an agency through 2022, and attribution's really difficult with PR. It's expensive.
Yeah.
My personal theory on it, maybe to be tested and proven, is that it makes sense to invest. You won't get any results if you invest in PR for 3 or 4 months. If you invest over maybe an 8 to 12 month period, then you can probably hit pause for a while and come back to it again if the ongoing expense isn't sustainable, and that's not something you can do. I think you can get some value that way. There were the key things at that time.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I was going to dig into, as you say, like when you're talking about the vendors, but these were, as you say, like folks that are helping you with the ICP, with PR and so on. And like we've dabbled, again, we're not a SaaS company. We've dabbled with PR. We've always found it very expensive. And again, perhaps we haven't done it the right way because we've only done it in short bursts for like 2 or 3 months. And then it's so difficult to get the attribution.
We went all in. We met with 10 PR agencies before we selected the one that we worked with. We worked with an agency called Transatlantic based out of London. But we were really, and we always, with all of our vendors, we're really selective. We will just keep talking to people until we find the people that are the right people for the problem we're trying to solve at this point in time.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real challenge with vendors. You get recommendations. Not everyone works out. We worked with a Californian content agency at one stage when we were trying to scale content. They were really expensive. We ended up not publishing one single piece that they wrote because they just weren't they didn't meet our bar.
Yeah.
But yeah, people give you recommendations and they say, these guys are amazing. You should work with them. I've heard really great things about them. But they might be amazing at certain things, but unless they're amazing at the very specific problem you're looking to solve right now for a business that's at your stage with your kind of budget, talking to your kind of audience, they may not be amazing for you.
When we look at last year, or even maybe the last sort of 12 month sort of period, right? Obviously, I think, and I hope, and I don't know if you share this, but like, it feels like things are picking up, certainly right now in the SaaS market. I mean, more investment is getting done, which is always a good sign. And, we're obviously seeing growth rounds come back where we're seeing valuations go crazy again in some instances. I think I saw the Bolt. I don't know if you saw the story today about Bolt's raising a Series F after all the issues that they had. And it's like 1,000x what their gross profit is or something like that. But over the last 12 months, preceding sort of like, now, it's been a very difficult market. And like the SaaS founders that we've been speaking to at SaaStock, like last year in Dublin, and even the SaaStock founder member retreat, I think without breaking confidence here, but, a lot of people are not growing, right? They're struggling at growing, the flat growth rates and, very frustrating, for a founder. Obviously, part of it's attributable, a lot of it's attributable to the market. But, and I think you mentioned this earlier, you grew 250% roughly in that period. So what's the secret there? Or what could you put this down to where everybody else is having, almost everybody else is having a really tough time? You're having this phenomenal growth rate during that period. So could you put it, what would you put that down to?
It's really hard to say. Like this is the only business I've ever founded. Yeah. So, arguably I'm not tested as a founder until I can deliver a return for shareholders multiple times. Then we'll all know if I'm a good founder or not, right? We're in a high growth space. That's crazy competitive.
Yeah.
Wildly competitive space, and that's really challenging. But it is a high growth space. The TAM is growing all the time. That helps. I think it's about focus. I think, I was a first-time founder, but I had been a COO at 3 different businesses. So I think having exposure to different businesses is helpful. Now, go-to-market was not my background, so I did not have that exposure, lacking that, and I've struggled with that. But I've been around tech startups for a long time. I would say network is just so hugely important. And I have a really, really great network of founders and advisors to lean on, and I use that. Again, a little bit like talking about the vendor thing. I don't just go and talk to people that are great people, and all the time people want to give you introductions to this great founder, this great investor, this person who maybe is extremely successful and might be a super high quality person. But I will only talk to them about very specific problems. I'm really considered about who I go to for advice. I have a hard and fast rule. I will never ask more than 3 people for advice about one problem, because everyone will give you a different answer and you end up with head spins if you ask too many people.
Yeah.
I will look at my list of people that I go to for advice, and I will say, who are the people that are have the most experience with this particular problem, but with solving this problem in the last couple of years. That is the thing with go-to-market. Things change so quickly. And if you're talking to advisors that were at the coalface solving these problems 5, 6, 7 years ago, their advice is not good advice for today and the way the market is today. So I think that's helped. I'm a numbers person. I'm really into metrics. I am really into the financials. I love a spreadsheet, and I eat, sleep and breathe those numbers, and I am on top of them. I think that makes a huge difference. Because you can't hide from the realities of what are happening, and you're forced to face up and redirect when things aren't working. And we have so much we're still figuring out. Scaling is really difficult. It never gets easy, and we have not had it's not like we've had one channel that's kicked off and has just delivered huge volume. We're really early stage with partnerships. We're just starting to try to figure that out. I was just talking to someone on the team about this yesterday. I have no idea how long it's going to take us to find a channel that really delivers. But it's about always looking at the next phase of where you want to get to. I think thinking in phases, and always having in mind where you're going to need to be in 2 phases time, and always being conscious and aware of, if that's where you want to get to, you are going to have to lay certain foundations today. And it takes time. Like stuff like SEO is extremely slow. We did have, there was a Google update in spring 22 that really helped us. And we really started to see a big growth in inbound around then. And you could say that was luck. We had a dedication and commitment to high quality content, and we knew that will pay off ultimately, and that's what happened there. So it's often about placing long-term bets. We don't think near-term. We are long-term in our thinking.
Yeah, that's definitely a good way to think and therefore grow. And you mentioned network in there, and having this great network personally, and of SaaS founders, and making this connection. Then, I think 12 months ago or less, you joined the SaaStock founder membership. We were obviously delighted to welcome you. And how helpful has it been for you, being part of that?
Very helpful. I mentioned that when I go looking for a vendor, I will talk to many different vendors. I have taken the same approach with formal networks. So as long as I've been working, I've always been network building. And I did make a career change around the time I turned 30. I left music, I moved into tech. And that was leaving behind my network. That was really scary. You feel like you've built up all of this trust and these relationships, and you are just walking out a door and in through a new door where you don't know anyone. But I've built a network in tech over 15 years, so I have a network and have people I can reach out to. Being a CEO, I realized I really needed something a bit more structured and formal, something where it's not just people that I casually know or that I'm in a WhatsApp group with, but people where we make a commitment to each other to help each other out. So I did look at a few different networks, kind of dipped my toe in and tested a few. And I just found that the SaaStock founder member group, it just worked for me. I met some really great people. I was at the retreat in May was it May?
I think it was March, actually, in Morocco. Yeah.
Right.
End
okay,
of March,
yeah, Morocco.
End of March.
I met an amazing bunch of people there. And yeah, you find these people that you can go to when you have these challenges and problems, and you start to identify who's likely to be able to advise you on the problem that you're having. And I can't recommend that highly enough to people. It's an investment. You have to invest in that to get back from it, but it's really worthwhile.
Yeah, definitely. But thank you for sharing, and we're delighted to have you as a SaaStock founder member. So we're going to move into the quickest fire round now, Dee. So I'd love to know what one thing has moved the needle the most for you in your career.
Actually, network was was what I thought of there. Yeah, I when I thought about this, I did think of events, content, and network, and I can't really. In terms of priority, I'd probably say events first, content, then network. Hugely valuable.
Okay,
take the time to do it.
What about best advice you've ever received?
So I don't know if I've ever actually I credit him when I talk to other people about this all the time, but I need to tell him, I quote him on this all the time. There's a founder called Ian Nolan, CEO of a company called Bright Flag, Irish company. And I remember going for a coffee with him, and I remember it so clearly. We were, I don't know, maybe at about 400K or something like that. And I was focused on getting to 1 million. And I sat with him having coffee, and I was all straining, how do we get to 1 million? How do we get to 1 million? And he said, slow down. Where are you at today? What's happening today? And he was asking me how frequently we were closing a new logo. And he said, look, you're closing, maybe it was one customer a week at the time. He said, your problem isn't getting to 2 million ARR. The problem you've to solve now is, how do you close 2 customers a week? Just focus on that. And I love the simplicity of that. And I apply it to so many things right now. Don't run before you can walk. Just figure out that next little step.
Very cool. I like that a lot. What about the biggest failure you've made and lesson learned?
We expanded based on trajectory just before the funding market changed. So in late 2021, confused about my years, late 2021, we hired quite a lot of people around mid-2021 and then set out to fundraise. And we really struggled to raise at the time. We couldn't close. 2022, springtime 2022, I set out to fundraise and it was just impossible to close around. And we ended up having to make layoffs. So I think it's that thing of when you see growth and when you are seeing traction, don't get carried away by that. Make sure that you're doing things really sustainably.
What about the hardest thing about being a CEO today?
The hardest thing about running a business today in the current climate is that customers are a lot slower to make buying decisions. They're extremely considered in their purchases. The CEO role, I think it's that thing of you don't have a peer in your organization, and you have to find that outside of your organization. And I think that you're making decisions with inputs from amazing people around you, but you're the one person in that role, and that can be really challenging.
What is your favorite book on business and why? It doesn't have to be a business book, but if it is.
Yeah, I read a lot of business books. I find it really difficult to pick one because a lot of business books are full of a lot of filler. I'm a firm believer in reading the whole book.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in the compounding effect of absorbing it whole rather than, a summary. But I feel it's always just snippets that stay with me. One that I often recommend to people, there isn't a huge amount of amazing content in it, but the concept I really believe in, it's called The Dip. It's by Seth Godin.
Yeah.
And it's really about that messy middle, the fact that the people that survive are the people that hold out the longest. And it's quite a visual book. There are a lot of graphics. And I often visualize those graphics when things are trickier, when it feels like there are fluctuations. For very early entrepreneurs, I'd recommend anything by Mike Michalowicz. He has a few books, Profit First, Clockwork, The Pumpkin Plan. I read all of those when I was really early stage with Boundless. And I've been in startups for years. And they're in many ways targeted at earlier stage lifestyle business type founders. But I think the fundamentals are important for any entrepreneur.
Oh, cool. Thanks for sharing. I'm going to throw a bonus one in here that wasn't there. Who's your favorite Wu-Tang member?
Oh, I can't even remember their names. We did lose one of their crew one time. They were playing in Amsterdam. One of the crew went missing. We did find him eventually.
I think I'll go with Method Man. Dee, thank you so much for being a fantastic guest on the SaaS Revolution Show. Where can people find you online? Where can they also find Boundless if they want to reach out?
So LinkedIn is probably the best place. If you search for Dee Coakley, Deecokley, I might not be the only one, but I'll probably be the first one that will come up. And Boundless is at www.boundlesshq.com.
Awesome.
So you'll find us there.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Dee. It's been great to see you, have you on the podcast for the first time, having realised that we now know each other for 10 years. And looking forward to seeing you at SaaStock in Dublin when we're back, which is the 14th to the 16th of October in Dublin, of course. So that's going to be great. And yes, well, I'll see you then. And thank you so much for being on the SaaS Revolution Show and sharing with the SaaStock community.
Excellent. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.